I left my toxic girlfriend for her twin sister. If you're ready for another roller coaster of a story, hit that subscribe button, and let's go. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to fall for twins. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs, and mine came in the form of Emily and Elise. Identical in looks, but polar opposites in every other way. Emily was the storm, wild, unpredictable, and destructive. Elise was the calm after, gentle, steady, and healing. And somehow, I found myself caught between them, my heart torn in two directions. It all started on a rainy Tuesday evening, the kind of night where the world feels heavy and the air smells like wet pavement. Emily and I had been dating for a year and a half, and I was beginning to feel like I was drowning. She was beautiful, sure, long dark hair, piercing green eyes, and a smile that could stop traffic. But her beauty was a mask, hiding a whirlwind of insecurity, jealousy, and constant criticism. That night, we were supposed to be celebrating our anniversary. I'd booked a table at her favorite restaurant, a cozy Italian place with dim lighting and a wine list longer than my arm. But from the moment I picked her up, I could tell something was off. She was quiet, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her lips pressed into a thin line. "What's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light as I drove through the rain-slicked streets. "Nothing," she snapped, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Why does something always have to be wrong with you?" I clenched the steering wheel, biting back the urge to argue. This was how it always went, me walking on eggshells, trying to avoid setting her off, and her finding reasons to be upset anyway. By the time we got to the restaurant, the tension between us was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The dinner was a disaster. She criticized everything. The wine was too dry, the pasta was too salty, the music was too loud. I tried to keep the conversation light, but every word out of my mouth seemed to irritate her more. Finally, after she'd sent her third dish back to the kitchen, I couldn't take it anymore. "Emily, what's going on?" I asked, my voice low. "This is supposed to be a special night, but you've been picking fights since I picked you up." She glared at me, her eyes flashing with anger. "Oh, so now it's my fault? Maybe if you actually put some effort into this relationship, I wouldn't have to complain so much." I felt my temper flare, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I'm trying, Emily. But it feels like no matter what I do, it's never enough for you." She rolled her eyes, leaning back in her chair. "Maybe you're just not enough, period." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, my mind racing. Was this really what our relationship had come to? Constant fighting, endless criticism, and no appreciation for anything I did? I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me, and for the first time, I seriously considered walking away. But then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a text from Elise. "Hey, just checking in. How's the anniversary dinner going?" I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. Elise was Emily's twin sister, but the two couldn't have been more different. Where Emily was sharp and cutting, Elise was warm and kind. She had the same dark hair and green eyes, but her smile was softer, her voice gentler. Over the past few months, we'd become close enough that I found myself confiding in her about my struggles with Emily. I typed out a quick reply. "Not great. She's in one of her moods again." The response came almost immediately. "I'm sorry. You don't deserve that." I felt a lump rise in my throat. Elise always knew what to say to make me feel better. She understood me in a way Emily never had. And as I sat there staring at my phone, I realized something that had been creeping into the back of my mind for weeks. I was falling for her. But before I could process that thought, Emily's voice cut through the silence. "Who are you texting?" she demanded, her eyes narrowing. I quickly slipped my phone back into my pocket. "No one. Just work stuff." She didn't believe me. I could see it in the way her jaw tightened, the way her fingers drummed against the table. "Let me see your phone." "Emily, come on," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's nothing." "If it's nothing, then you won't mind showing me," she shot back, her tone icy. I felt a surge of frustration. This was it, the final straw. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly under her microscope, always having to prove myself. I took a deep breath, meeting her gaze. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not showing you my phone. And I'm not going to keep defending myself every time you get paranoid. This isn't healthy, Emily. I can't do this anymore." Her eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, she looked like she'd been slapped. But then her expression hardened, and she leaned across the table, her voice low and venomous. "Fine. If you're so unhappy, then leave. But don't come crawling back when you realize no one else will put up with you." Her words stung, but they also gave me clarity. I stood up, tossing my napkin onto the table. "You're right. I'm unhappy, and I'm done trying to fix something that's been broken for a long time." I turned and walked out of the restaurant, the sound of her angry shouts fading behind me. The rain had picked up, soaking through my jacket as I made my way to my car. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys, my mind racing. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't go home. Not yet. I needed to clear my head, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. And as I drove through the rain-soaked streets, one thought kept circling in my mind: Elise. I pulled out my phone, hesitating for a moment before typing out a message. Can I come over? I need to talk. The response came almost instantly. Of course. I'm here for you. And just like that, I knew where I was going. To Elise. To the calm after the storm. The drive to Elise's apartment felt like it took forever, even though it was only a few miles away. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, relief, and something else I couldn't quite put my finger on. Guilt, maybe? Or anticipation. All I knew was that I needed to see Elise. She was the only person who could make sense of the chaos in my head. When I finally pulled up to her building, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. I sat in my car for a moment, staring up at her window. The light was on, casting a warm glow through the curtains. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and then got out of the car. The walk up to her apartment felt like an eternity. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands were still shaking. I knocked on the door, and a moment later, it swung open. Elise stood there, her dark hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, her green eyes filled with concern. She was wearing an oversized sweater and a pair of leggings, and she looked so much like Emily that it took my breath away. But then she smiled, and the resemblance faded. Emily's smile was always sharp like a knife. Elise's was soft like a blanket. "Hey," she said softly, stepping aside, "let me in." "Come on, you're soaked." I stepped inside, the warmth of her apartment wrapping around me like a hug. She closed the door behind me, and for a moment, we just stood there, looking at each other. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. I shook my head, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on me. "No, I'm not." She reached out, placing a hand on my arm. "Come sit down. I'll make you some tea." I followed her into the living room, sinking down onto the couch. She disappeared into the kitchen, and I could hear the sound of water boiling, the clink of a spoon against a mug. I closed my eyes, tried to steady my breathing. A few minutes later, she returned, carrying 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to me, then sat down beside me, tucking her legs underneath her. "What happened?" she asked, her voice soft. I took a sip of the tea, the warmth spreading through me. "We had a fight. A big one. I ended things." Her eyes widened in surprise. "You broke up with her?" I nodded, staring down at the mug in my hands. I couldn't do it anymore, Elise. The constant criticism, the jealousy, the insecurity, it was too much. I felt like I was drowning. She was silent for a moment, and then she reached out, placing a hand on mine. "I'm so sorry, Alex. I know how much you cared about her." I looked up at her, my heart aching. I did. I do. But it wasn't enough. Nothing I did was ever enough for her. Elise's eyes were filled with sympathy, and she squeezed my hand. "You deserve better than that. You deserve someone who appreciates you, who makes you happy." I felt a lump rise in my throat, and I looked away, my eyes stinging with tears. I don't know what to do now. Everything feels so messed up." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You don't have to figure it all out right now. Just take it one step at a time. And know that I'm here for you no matter what." I turned to look at her, my heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Elise. I don't know what I'd do without you." She smiled, her eyes warm. "You don't have to find out." We sat there for a while, sipping our tea and talking. She told me about her day, about the book she was reading, about the new recipe she tried. It was so easy, so comfortable being with her. There was no tension, no drama, no walking on eggshells. Just peace. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more between us. Something unspoken. Every time our eyes met, I felt a spark, a connection that went beyond friendship. And I couldn't help but wonder if she felt it too. Finally, as the clock ticked past midnight, I knew I had to go. I stood up, setting my mug on the coffee table. I should probably head home. It's late. She stood up too, walking me to the door. "Are you sure you're okay to drive?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I'll be fine. Thanks for everything." She smiled back, her eyes soft. "Anytime, Alex. Really." I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. And then, before I could second-guess myself, I leaned in and kissed her. It was a soft kiss, gentle and tentative, but it was enough to send a jolt of electricity through me. For a moment she froze, and I was terrified that I'd made a mistake. But then she kissed me back, her hands coming up to rest on my chest. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with surprise. "Alex," she whispered, her voice trembling. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that." She shook her head, her eyes searching mine. "No, it's okay. I didn't expect it." I took a deep breath, my mind spinning. Elise, I don't know what's happening, but I know that being with you feels right. And after everything with Emily, I need to know if you feel it too. She was silent for a moment, her eyes filled with a mixture of emotions. And then she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I do. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, and I pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you for being here for me. She hugged me back, her arms warm and comforting. Always, Alex. Always. We stood there for a long time, holding each other in the quiet of her apartment. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like everything was going to be okay. The days that followed were a blur. I moved out of the apartment I shared with Emily, crashing on a friend's couch until I could find a place of my own. It was a strange, liminal space, no longer tied to Emily, but not yet fully free. And through it all, Elise was my anchor. We didn't talk about the kiss, not right away. It hung between us, unspoken but ever present. We spent more time together, though, and it was easy to fall into a rhythm with her. She was everything Emily wasn't, kind, patient, understanding. Being with her felt like coming up for air after being underwater for too long. But as much as I wanted to dive headfirst into whatever was growing between us, I knew I had to be careful. Emily was still out there, and the last thing I wanted was to hurt her more than I already had. So I took things slow, savoring the moments with Elise, but keeping a respectful distance. That all changed one night, about a week after the breakup. I was at Elise's apartment, helping her cook dinner. We were laughing, our hands brushing as we passed ingredients back and forth. And then, out of nowhere, she turned to me, her expression serious. Alex, we need to talk, she said, her voice quiet. I felt a knot form in my stomach, but I nodded. Okay, what's up? She took a deep breath, her eyes searching mine. I know things have been complicated, and I don't want to rush you or push you into anything, but I need to know where we stand, because I can't keep pretending that I don't have feelings for you. I felt my heart skip a beat, and I reached out, taking her hand in mine. Elise, I have feelings for you too, but I don't want to hurt you. Or Emily. I need to figure things out. She nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. I get that, and I don't want to rush you, but I also don't want to keep hiding how I feel. I care about you, Alex, and I want to be with you, but only if you're ready. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. I knew she was right. I couldn't keep stringing her along, not when she was being so honest with me. And the truth was I was ready. Ready to move on, ready to start something new. Ready to be with her. I'm ready, I said, my voice steady. I want to be with you, Elise. I need to know that you're sure, that this is what you want. She smiled, her eyes shining with tears. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. And just like that, the dam broke. We kissed, and it was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. It was soft and sweet, but there was a fire behind it, a passion that had been building for weeks. I pulled her closer, my hands tangling in her hair, and she melted into me, her body pressed against mine. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with love and hope. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice trembling. But I'm also so happy. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. Me too, but we'll figure out together, okay? She nodded, her smile widening. Together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The weeks that followed were some of the best of my life. Elise and I fell into a rhythm, our relationship growing stronger with each passing day. We spent our nights curled up on the couch, watching movies and talking about everything and nothing. We went on dates, exploring the city, and trying new restaurants. And through it all, I felt a sense of peace and happiness that I hadn't felt in years. But as much as I wanted to focus on the present, the past kept creeping in. Emily was still a part of my life, even if we weren't together anymore. She texted me occasionally, her messages a mix of anger and sadness. I tried to be kind, to give her the space she needed to heal, but it was hard. I didn't want to hurt her, but I also couldn't keep living in the shadow of our failed relationship. One night, as Elise and I were lying in bed, she turned to me, her expression serious. Have you talked to Emily lately? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. A little. She's not doing great. I think she's still really hurt. Elise nodded, her eyes filled with sympathy. I can't imagine how hard this is for her. But you can't keep carrying that guilt, Alex. You did what you had to do, and you deserve to be happy. I knew she was right, but it was easier said than done. I don't want to hurt her more than I already have. She reached out, taking my hand in hers. I know, but you can't keep putting your life on hold for her. You have to move forward, and I'll be here every step of the way. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me, and I pulled her into a hug. Thank you, Elise. I don't know what I'd do without you. She smiled, her eyes warm. You don't have to find out. And with that, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living in the past, tied to a relationship that had brought me nothing but pain. I had to move forward to embrace the future with Elise. And for the first time, I felt ready. The next day, I texted Emily, asking if we could meet. She agreed, and we met at a coffee shop, the same one where we'd had our first date. It was strange sitting across from her, knowing that so much had changed between us. "How have you been?" I asked, my voice gentle. She shrugged, her eyes avoiding mine. "Okay, I guess. It's been hard." I nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. "I know, and I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "Then why did you leave?" I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Because I couldn't keep living like that, Emily. I was unhappy, and I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. I needed to do what was best for me." She was silent for a moment, and then she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I get that, and I'm sorry too. For everything." I felt a lump rise in my throat, and I reached out, taking her hand in mine. "You don't have to apologize. I want you to be happy, and I hope that someday you can forgive me." She smiled, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and acceptance. "I will. It'll just take time." We sat there for a while, talking and reminiscing. And for the first time, it felt like we were finally on the same page. We weren't the same people we'd been when we started dating, and that was okay. We were both moving forward in our own ways. When we finally said goodbye, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't realized I needed. I walked out of the coffee shop, the sun shining down on me, and I felt lighter than I had in months. Elise was waiting for me when I got home, her eyes filled with concern. "How did it go?" I smiled, pulling her into a hug. "It went well. I think we're both ready to move on." She smiled back, her eyes shining with love. "I'm proud of you, Alex." And as I held her in my arms, I knew that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. With her. With Elise. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly happy. If you love a good Reddit deep dive, hit subscribe, and stay tuned for even more.